The night is quiet, and the world feels very old. Somewhere beyond the reach of memory, beyond the first fires and the first words, there lingers a sense that time did not begin with us. It stretches backward into a darkness so deep that even imagination grows tired trying to follow it. In this stillness, thoughts soften, breathing slows, and the mind drifts toward places that cannot be found on any map, yet seem strangely familiar, as if visited once in a dream long forgotten. There is a hush that comes before stories are told, a moment where the air itself seems to listen. In that hush, one may feel that history is not a straight road, but a river whose source is hidden beneath layers of silt and stone. We stand on its banks, watching the surface flow, naming each ripple as a new discovery, a new beginning. Yet beneath, there are deeper currents, moving slowly, carrying fragments from places upstream that we have never seen. In the soft glow of imagined lantern light, we begin to sense that the world has always been filled with whispers. Whispers in the wind that brushes across empty deserts. Whispers in the hush of ruined stones. Whispers in the stories told by grandparents whose own grandparents spoke of things they did not fully understand. These whispers do not declare facts. They do not prove. They merely suggest, gently, that something older once stirred where we now walk. Only after settling into this quiet can a question arise. Not sharp, not urgent, but tender, like a thought forming just before sleep. Perhaps human civilization is not a first chapter, but a later verse in a song that began before we arrived. Perhaps the structures we call beginnings are echoes of something older, not known, not recorded, only remembered, imperfectly, through fragile strands of tradition and myth. In distant ages, when the world was young in ways we cannot measure, people gathered around fires and shared tales. They spoke of times before their time, of teachers who seemed more than human, of cities that shone and vanished, of waters that rose and fell, of knowledge that arrived as if from nowhere, then slipped away again. These stories traveled across generations, carried by voices that changed them, softened them, turned them into symbols. Over time, they became legends, then myths, then curiosities. Yet perhaps, within their shifting forms, they held the scent of something that truly happened in some forgotten manner. In the lands between rivers, where mud bricks baked under the sun, people once pressed symbols into clay. They recorded lists of kings, offerings to gods, accounts of harvests, and dreams. Among these writings, there were names that seemed larger than life, beings who were not quite human, not quite divine, figures who walked between sky and earth. Today, we call them ancient gods. We read their stories as mythology. Yet in the minds of those who first shaped these tales, they may have been something else entirely. Memories of visitors, teachers, guardians, or perhaps simply the way early minds made sense of forces too vast to grasp. It may be that such figures were never flesh and bone. It may be that they were personifications of knowledge itself, or of natural powers. Or it may be that behind the poetry there lay an echo of something real but unrecognizable to us now. We cannot know. We can only listen to the rhythm of the old stories and notice how often they speak of a time before time, of ages when the world was shaped, when humans were guided, when order was established from chaos. In these stories, the ancient gods rarely conquer. They arrive, they instruct, they set boundaries, They show how to plant seeds, how to read the stars, how to build with stone and brick. Then, in many tales, they withdraw. They depart across waters, ascend into sky, disappear into mountains, or simply fade from direct contact. They leave humanity to grow on its own, carrying faint impressions of their presence. Perhaps these are only myths. Perhaps they are symbolic ways of describing how early civilizations slowly learned to live. But perhaps, just perhaps, they also carry a memory of a turning point, a transition from one age to another, a passing of knowledge from a world that had already lived and ended. Imagine, not as a claim, but as a gentle possibility, that before the cities we know, there were others. Before the histories we write, there were histories lost. Not necessarily grander, not necessarily more advanced, simply older, worn away by water, by wind, by time, reduced to sand and scattered stone, their names forgotten, their voices silent, only traces surviving in the stories of those who came later. Flood myths appear again and again in distant cultures, not identical, but similar in tone. Waters rising, worlds washed away, survivors clinging to fragments, knowledge preserved on boats, in caves, on mountaintops. Whether these tales describe real events or imagined purifications, they share a feeling that the world once reset itself, that something ended so something else could begin. If such a memory existed, it would not be carried as precise history. It would be held as emotion, as image, as sacred narrative. Over centuries, the event itself would blur, leaving only symbols. A great flood, a divine judgment, a cleansing, a new dawn. And within those symbols, an unspoken suggestion. We are not the first. In the cradle of early cities, people looked up at the stars and saw patterns. They named constellations. They measured time by moon and sun. They built monuments aligned with celestial movements. It is tempting to see this as sudden brilliance, but perhaps it was gradual, passed down through trial, error, and inherited memory, knowledge accumulating slowly. Yet sometimes the myths say the knowledge came from elsewhere, from the sky, from the deep, from beings who taught and then withdrew. These tales, whether literal or metaphorical, invite a quiet wonder, not that gods descended in machines, not that aliens ruled ancient Earth, but that humanity has always sensed that its knowledge is inherited, passed along a chain whose earliest links are hidden in darkness. When we look at ancient stone structures, weathered and worn, we often ask how they were built, what tools were used, what skills were required. These are practical questions. But beneath them lies another feeling, a recognition that we are gazing at messages sent across vast time. Messages from people who lived, dreamed, feared, hoped. People who themselves may have felt connected to something older. It may be that every civilization feels it stands at the center of time, that each generation believes it has discovered the world anew. But the persistent presence of old stories suggests something else, that we are part of a long chain of remembrance, that behind every recorded history lies another layer of forgotten experience. Perhaps the idea of ancient gods is one way humanity expressed gratitude for knowledge it did not fully understand. Perhaps naming teachers as divine was a way of honoring wisdom that seemed miraculous. Or perhaps there were once individuals whose understanding was far beyond their peers, remembered as something more than human. Over time, their reality softened into myth. In the stories of the lands between rivers, The gods gather in councils. They plan the shaping of the world. They decide the fate of humans. They bestow kingship. Then they retreat to distant realms. In these patterns, one might see the structure of human imagination, or one might glimpse a memory of guidance that faded. As centuries passed, the stories were copied, translated, reshaped. Empires rose and fell, libraries burned, clay tablets broke, papyrus crumbled. With each loss, more of the original context vanished. What remains are fragments, and fragments invite speculation. Yet in this quiet exploration, we do not declare. We only wonder. We let the mind drift through possibilities like a boat on still water. Maybe there were ages before ours that ended abruptly. Maybe survivors carried forward pieces of knowledge. Maybe the first cities we know were not the first attempts at civilization, but the first that endured long enough to leave lasting marks. Even today, the earth hides its past. Forests swallow ruins. Oceans cover coastlines. Deserts bury stone under dunes. If an older world once existed, its traces could be hidden beneath layers we have not yet disturbed. Or perhaps it existed only in story, in the symbolic language of early minds. In either case, the effect is the same. Humanity senses that it is continuing something rather than starting it, that our civilizations are chapters in a larger book whose opening pages have been torn away. As night deepens, we imagine early people gazing at the same stars we see now. They too felt small beneath the sky. They too wondered where they came from. They, too, told stories to ease the mystery. Their voices, carried forward, reach us, still, faint but persistent. In these stories, the ancient gods do not remain. They withdraw. They leave humanity to find its own path. They become silent figures at the edge of memory, not conquerors, not tyrants, simply presences that fade as humans grow into their own agency. Perhaps that is the true meaning of such myths. Not evidence of external rulers, but reflections of an inner truth. That wisdom often feels as if it comes from beyond us, and once received, it becomes ours to carry. And so we find ourselves here, in a world of cities, machines, lights that banish the night. Yet beneath the hum of modern life, the same old question hums quietly. Did something come before us? Did we inherit more than we know? Are we the aftermath of something older? We do not answer. We do not insist. We simply sit with the question. Let it breathe. Let it soften the edges of certainty. Let it open a small door in the mind where wonder can enter. Because perhaps the value of these ancient memories is not in proving or disproving them. It is in reminding us that we are part of a story far larger than ourselves. That our achievements stand on forgotten foundations. That time is vast, and we are brief travelers within it. As the mind relaxes into this thought, the images of old clay tablets, silent ruins, whispered legends, and withdrawn gods begin to blur together. They become a single impression, a sense of inheritance, of echoes passed down corridors too long to see. And in that impression, we find ourselves not at the beginning, not at the end, but somewhere in the middle of a tale still unfolding. In that quiet middle place, between what was and what will be, we listen more closely, not with ears, but with the inward sense that notices patterns across generations. A child learns words from parents who learned them from theirs, each voice adding small changes, softening some sounds, strengthening others. So too with stories. What begins as experience becomes tale, then myth, then symbol. And yet, even as shapes change, something of the original feeling remains, like a scent clinging to cloth long after the wearer has gone. When we speak of the earliest civilizations, we often picture the first farmers, the first towns, the first temples rising from the plain. But even they looked backward. They spoke of ancestors. They spoke of times when the world was arranged, when order was established, when sacred knowledge was given. Their earliest records already refer to something older. Already they felt late in the story. In the clay tablets of ancient cities, there are lists of kings that begin not with ordinary rulers, but with figures who reigned for impossibly long spans. Whether symbolic or imagined, these lists hint at an intuition that before everyday history, there was a different kind of time, a time when the world was closer to its origins, a time when the line between mortal and divine was not yet fixed. We might see this as a poetic way of saying that memory fades as it stretches backward. The further we go, the less precise it becomes, until finally it turns into legend. But within that legend may be preserved a sense of rupture, a feeling that something once ended and something else began. Across many lands, stories speak of an age when humans were fewer, when life was simpler, when the world itself seemed nearer to the sacred. Then comes a change, sometimes a flood, sometimes a great wind, sometimes a fire from the sky, sometimes merely the passing of an era. Afterward, survivors rebuild. They carry fragments forward. They remember instructions, rituals, crafts, songs. The new world grows upon the bones of the old. Whether these are literal events or symbolic narratives, they mirror a truth about civilization. It is layered. Each generation stands upon the remains of those before. Cities are built over older cities. Roads follow ancient paths. Languages carry fossils of forgotten tongues. Customs persist long after their origins are lost. So it is not difficult to imagine that the first known civilizations were themselves inheritors, not necessarily of a vast advanced world, but of smaller attempts, earlier gatherings, first experiments in settled life that left only faint traces. Their memory would not be scientific record. It would be story, sacred tale, ancestral whisper, and in those whispers, figures appear. Teachers who know how to measure the sky, beings who establish laws, voices that instruct humans in rituals that bind community together. Sometimes they're described as coming from the heavens, sometimes from the sea, sometimes from the underworld. Their origins vary, but their role is similar. They are bringers of order. Perhaps these are reflections of the first wise elders, the first organizers, the first minds that saw beyond immediate survival. Perhaps they were human, later remembered as more than human. Or perhaps they are metaphors for knowledge itself arriving in consciousness. However one reads them, they mark a transition from wandering to dwelling, from chaos to structure. Once that structure is established, the stories often say, the teachers withdraw. They do not remain to rule. They depart, leaving humanity to govern itself. In this motif, there is a quiet dignity. The gods are not conquerors, not overseers, but catalysts. They set something in motion and then recede. This withdrawal feels like an echo of childhood. Parents teach a child to walk, to speak, to understand. Then, slowly, they step back. The child becomes an adult. The guidance is remembered, but the guiding hand is no longer visible. The ancient gods, in this light, may be the remembered feeling of being guided into maturity. As civilizations grow, they accumulate complexity. Temples rise, kings rule, armies march, markets bustle, writing spreads. But the earliest sense of awe remains, preserved in hymns and prayers. People still look upward or inward and feel that something larger once shaped their path. Yet time is relentless. Cities fall. Rivers change course. Sands drift. Empires become ruins. Knowledge stored in fragile forms disappears. And when later generations uncover these remains, they experience the same awe. They look at broken statues and eroded inscriptions and feel that something great preceded them. The cycle repeats. Each age looks back at the last and imagines an even older one beyond. So perhaps the idea that human civilization is the aftermath of something older is not a single historical event, but a recurring sensation, a recognition that every present is built upon forgotten pasts, that no beginning is truly the first. Still, it is soothing to imagine a time before all written memory, a time when people first learned to live in fixed places, when they first raised walls against the wind, when they first stored grain against winter, when they first named the stars. These are acts so foundational that they might feel divine to those who followed. And in that imagining, we might see the ancient gods as the spirit of those first discoveries. Not physical beings, but symbolic carriers of insight. Their withdrawal is the moment when knowledge becomes common, no longer mysterious, no longer sacred, simply human. Yet another layer of possibility lingers, that before even these first farmers, there were other attempts, gatherings that rose and dissolved, ways of life that left few traces, coastal settlements swallowed by rising seas, camps lost to shifting forests. Their memory would be carried only in faint impressions, perhaps in the universal sense that the world once changed drastically. When ice sheets receded, when climates shifted, when landscapes transformed, humans adapted, migrations occurred. Some knowledge would be lost, some carried forward. Stories of a world before might survive as tales of paradise, or of catastrophe, or of exile. Myths of golden ages and great floods may echo such transitions. In this view, civilization is indeed an aftermath, not of one single lost world, but of many forgotten phases. Each era leaves something behind: tools, words, habits, beliefs. The next era inherits them, reshapes them, adds its own layer. And so, when we gaze at ancient tablets, pyramids, megaliths, and forgotten cities, we are not only seeing the first steps of culture, we are seeing the visible peaks of a mountain whose base is hidden underground. The temptation is to turn this into certainty, to declare exact ages, exact events, exact beings. But in this quiet exploration, we do not grasp so tightly. We let the uncertainty remain soft. We allow room for mystery, for imagination, for the humility of not knowing, for the mind at rest. This uncertainty is not disturbing. It is comforting. It suggests that life is part of something vast and continuous, that we are not isolated in time, that countless generations have asked the same questions, told the same stories, wondered the same wonder. Perhaps the greatest inheritance of all is this impulse to look back, to sense that what is visible is not all that has been, to feel that the present is a veil drawn over deeper layers. In the end, whether ancient gods were ever more than metaphor does not matter for the mood of the story. What matters is that humanity has always carried the feeling of having been taught, guided, shaped, of not being entirely self-created, of being the continuation of something older. And in that feeling, there is tenderness. We are children of forgotten ages. We walk on soil made from the dust of those who came before. We speak words shaped by mouths, long turned to silence. We build with knowledge assembled piece by piece across millennia. So when the question arises, might human civilization be the aftermath of something older? It is not a challenge to reason. It is an invitation to remember how deep time truly is. How many layers of life lie beneath our feet? How many stories have been told before ours? The mind, drifting toward sleep, does not need an answer. It only needs the rhythm of the thought, the gentle sway of possibility, the image of ancient figures stepping back into shadow, the sense of a world that has ended so another could begin. And in that dim space, between wakefulness and dream, we can almost feel it, the quiet echo of something older. The echo lingers, not as a sound, but as a presence at the edge of thought, something sensed rather than seen. It is the feeling one has when standing in the ruins of an ancient place, where stones have watched more sunsets than any living eye could count. A feeling that lives beneath language, beneath certainty. The quiet awareness that we are late arrivals to a story already long underway. Imagine a traveler walking through a forgotten city swallowed by sand. No names remain on the wind. No voices answer. Yet the traveler feels watched, not by spirits or ghosts, but by time itself. The walls lean inward, as if remembering hands that placed them. The air tastes of histories, dissolved, and for a moment, the traveler wonders whether these ruins were themselves built upon older foundations, now buried deeper still, layers upon layers, each generation building over the last, until the first layer is no longer reachable. So too with memory. Our minds hold what they can, then let the rest fade. Humanity's collective mind works the same way. What is remembered becomes tradition. What is half remembered becomes myth. What is forgotten becomes mystery. And mystery has a way of calling to us in the quiet hours, when the noise of daily life softens and the imagination opens like a night-blooming flower. The ancient stories speak of beginnings, but they also speak of endings. Worlds destroyed, ages completed, orders replaced. Whether these were metaphors for seasonal cycles, political changes, or natural disasters, the emotional truth is the same. Something precious was lost. Something precious was preserved. Something new began, carrying both grief and hope. In many traditions, there is a sense that earlier humans lived closer to the source of knowledge, that they heard voices more clearly, that they saw signs in the sky and earth that we no longer notice. This is not necessarily a claim of superiority, but a longing, a wish that we, too, could feel as connected as they seemed to feel. Perhaps this is why ancient gods are remembered not as tyrants, but as distant teachers. They do not force, they show, they guide, and then, once guidance is given, they recede. Their absence becomes as meaningful as their presence. They leave humanity with a sense of responsibility, a sense that what has been given must now be carried forward. And carry forward we do, though we often forget that we are doing so. A simple tool passes from hand to hand across generations, refined, reshaped, perfected. A melody is hummed by a mother, learned by a child, changed slightly, passed again. A ritual performed to honor harvest becomes a festival, then a holiday, then a faint cultural memory. The origin dissolves, but the shape remains. If there truly were forgotten civilizations before the first cities we know, their influence might survive in such subtle ways, not in grand monuments, but in instincts, in the way humans gather, in the way we mark time, in the way we look to the sky for meaning, in the way we feel uneasy when we imagine ourselves as the first and only. There is a humility in recognizing that we are inheritors, not creators from nothing, but receivers of a vast inheritance we do not fully understand. This inheritance includes knowledge, language, culture, but also questions. Questions that repeat across ages. Who are we? Where did we come from? What came before us? Why do we feel that something was lost? The idea of a lost age, of a world before, is not new. It lives in every story of paradise left behind, of golden eras that faded, of sacred times that will never return. Whether these were once real conditions or idealized memories does not change their emotional power. They express the same longing, that there was once a closeness to something greater, and that now we are further away. Perhaps this is the true withdrawal of the gods. Not a physical departure, but a symbolic one. A shift from a world experienced as enchanted to a world experienced as ordinary. In childhood, everything feels alive and full of wonder. In adulthood, the world grows solid and fixed. The transition is natural, yet we carry nostalgia for the earlier feeling. The myths of gods withdrawing may be the collective memory of that transition. If so, then ancient civilizations were not merely technical beginnings. They were psychological thresholds. Moments when humans began to see themselves as separate, as responsible, as authors of their own fate. The divine teacher fades, and the human student steps forward. But even as we step forward, we keep looking back. We build museums. We study ruins. We read old texts. We tell stories about stories. We search for origins. We search for the first spark. We search for the moment when something older became something new. In this endless looking back, we sometimes forget to notice the simple beauty of the mystery itself. That the past is not fully knowable, that it remains partly hidden. That certainty is not the only way of understanding. There is also listening, imagining, feeling. The calm mind drifting towards sleep does not need to solve the riddle of ancient ages. It only needs to feel the depth of time stretching behind it, to feel that life did not begin with us and will not end with us, that we are threads in a tapestry woven by countless hands, some remembered, many forgotten. And perhaps that is enough, to rest in the thought that our civilization, with all its lights and noise and speed, may simply be another layer upon the ancient earth, that beneath our cities lie other cities, beneath our stories lie other stories, beneath our knowledge lie other ways of knowing. Somewhere, far back, there may have been a first storyteller who looked at the stars and felt the same wonder, a first builder who raised a wall against the wind, a first priest who lit a fire and spoke to the darkness. Whether they lived 10,000 years ago or much earlier does not matter in this moment. What matters is that their impulse lives on in us. And when we tell stories of ancient gods, of withdrawn teachers, of lost worlds, we are not merely inventing fantasies. We are expressing an intuition that our lives are part of a longer journey, that we are walking paths worn by many feet before us, that we are, in some quiet way, the aftermath of something older. The thought settles gently, like dust in still air. Nothing needs to be proven, nothing needs to be resolved. The mind can simply rest in the vastness of time, in the softness of possibility, in the calm suggestion that behind every beginning, there is another beginning, further back, waiting in the darkness. The darkness behind closed eyes is not empty. It is a vast field where impressions drift like slow-moving clouds. In that inner space, the idea of an older world no longer feels strange. It feels natural, as if the mind has always known that life is layered, that each moment rests upon countless moments before it. Thoughts loosen, the body softens, breathing deepens, and in this gentle state, the story continues without effort. Somewhere in the deep past, a small group gathers around a fire. Their faces glow in the flickering light. Sparks rise into the night air and vanish. Someone speaks. Perhaps it is a story of a great water that once covered everything, or of a shining place beyond the horizon, or of beings who taught their ancestors how to live. The listeners lean in. Children hold their breath. Elders nod, remembering when they themselves first heard the tale. No one asks whether it is factual. It is meaningful. It binds them together. It connects them to those who came before. Generations pass. The group becomes a village. The village becomes a town. The story remains, but changes shape. A detail is forgotten. Another is added. A name becomes a symbol. A symbol becomes a god. Over time, the tale is carved into stone, pressed into clay, sung in hymns. Now, it is part of a civilization's identity. And still, beneath all the transformations, there lingers a faint echo of something that once happened, or once was felt deeply enough to be carried forward. Civilizations rise in river valleys, on high plateaus, along coasts. Each believes itself unique. Each believes it stands at the threshold of progress. Yet each also carries stories of what came before. Even when they conquer and replace one another, the conquerors adopt the myths of the conquered, reshaping them, weaving them into their own. Nothing is entirely new. Everything is inherited. This inheritance is not just knowledge or belief. It is a rhythm of thought, a way of sensing the world, a tendency to look beyond the visible, to imagine unseen influences. Ancient gods, spirits, ancestors, teachers. These are expressions of the same human awareness that existence feels guided, shaped by forces beyond immediate comprehension. Perhaps this awareness is what keeps the idea of an older world alive, not because there must have been a grand lost civilization, but because humans have always felt that they are part of a continuum, that the moment of their own life is not isolated, that behind them stands a long chain of lives, choices, accidents, discoveries, mistakes, triumphs, collapses. A chain so long that the mind cannot hold it all, so it turns the distant parts into myth. The ancient gods in these myths often speak few words. They do not engage in constant conversation with humanity. They appear at crucial moments. They show something. They establish a pattern, and then they retreat. Their silence is profound. It leaves space for humans to fill with their own actions, their own interpretations. The gods become mirrors in which humanity sees its own potential. This pattern appears again and again. A culture tells of a teacher who arrives, instructs, then departs across the sea. Another speaks of a wise being who emerges from the earth, gives laws, then returns to the depths. Another describes luminous visitors who descend, share knowledge, then ascend to the sky. Whether these images reflect natural forces, inspired leaders, or pure imagination, they all express the same motif. Knowledge arrives from beyond, then becomes internalized. And once knowledge is internalized, it no longer feels foreign. It becomes simply human. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The divine becomes cultural. The memory of origin fades, leaving behind rituals, habits, techniques, and beliefs whose roots are no longer recognized. Perhaps, if there was once a dramatic shift in human existence, be it climatic, ecological, social, or spiritual, it would be remembered in just this way, not as a precise record, but as an enduring sense that things were once different, that the world turned, that something ended, that something began. The concept of a flood captures this perfectly. Water washes away, water erases footprints, water changes landscapes, water leaves survivors clinging to remnants. Whether an actual flood occurred in one region or many, the metaphor resonates universally. It speaks of loss. It speaks of renewal. It speaks of a clean slate that is never completely clean, because memory remains. In the stories, survivors carry seeds, tools, sacred objects, knowledge. They repopulate the land. They rebuild. They pass on warnings. They honor what was lost. In this way, a catastrophe becomes a bridge between ages. The new world is the aftermath of the old. Even if such a catastrophe happened only in small, scattered ways, local floods, droughts, migrations, it could still seed a global pattern of storytelling. Each group experiences upheaval, rebuilds, tells tales of what came before. Over thousands of years, these threads intertwine into a tapestry of collective memory. Thus, when modern minds wonder whether civilization is the aftermath of something older, they are participating in a very ancient habit of thought, looking backward, imagining a prior state, sensing a hidden origin. It is not a modern fascination, it is a human one. Yet there is something especially evocative about the oldest written civilizations we know. They appear suddenly in the record with complex writing, organized cities, sophisticated myths. To the modern eye, this feels abrupt, a jump. And where there is a jump, imagination fills the gap with stories of what might have been in between. Maybe there were slower transitions we have not yet uncovered. Maybe fragile early attempts left little trace. Maybe organic materials rotted away. Maybe sea levels rose and submerged coastlines where early settlements once stood. All of these are possible. None require grand, hidden empires. Just the simple reality that the earth does not preserve everything equally. And yet, even without physical evidence, the emotional resonance remains that we are latecomers to a much longer process, that the first city was not the first community, that the first temple was not the first ritual, that the first writing was not the first attempt to remember. In this sense, the idea of ancient gods teaching humanity can be seen as the poetic expression of inherited knowledge. Knowledge always comes from somewhere. No child invents language alone. No generation invents culture alone. It is received, absorbed, modified. The giver becomes forgotten. The gift remains. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of these old myths is their acceptance of mystery. They do not insist on complete explanation. They leave space for the unknown. The gods come from an undefined beyond. They return to an undefined beyond. They are not pinned down, not dissected, not fully understood. They remain distant, fading figures. This distance is essential. It preserves wonder. It keeps the mind open. It allows each listener to fill the silence with their own inner images. In the quiet of night, when the day's concerns fall away, such images arise easily. A long shoreline under moonlight, waves washing over forgotten foundations, a solitary figure watching the horizon, carrying a memory of a world that no longer exists, a teacher walking away into the mist, leaving behind a group of humans now responsible for themselves. These images are not evidence. They are mirrors. They reflect our own feelings of transition, of loss, of inheritance, of stepping into adulthood as a species and as individuals. And so the story continues, not as a line of facts, but as a slow meditation on time, memory, and belonging. We are not the first to wonder. We will not be the last. The question of what came before us will persist as long as humans have minds that can turn inward and backward. For now, we rest in the possibility. Civilization may indeed be the aftermath of something older, not necessarily a single lost world, but countless forgotten moments, choices, struggles, and insights that shape the ground on which we stand. The thought settles like a blanket, soft, heavy, comforting. Nothing to prove, nothing to solve, only the sense of a long, gentle continuity, stretching back beyond sight, whispering through the quiet corridors of the mind. The whisper becomes softer still, as if even thought is slowing, becoming heavier, drifting downward like a feather through deep night air. There is no need to search for images now. They rise on their own, gentle and indistinct, like memories from a life not personally lived yet somehow familiar. A shoreline again, not the same shoreline as before, but one that feels older. The sea is calm. The sky is a muted gray. Figures move slowly along the water's edge, gathering what remains after a great retreat. Bits of wood, strange stones, broken tools, seeds saved in small woven pouches. No one speaks loudly. Their voices have the hush of people who carry loss and gratitude together. Something has ended. Something has been spared. They will build again. This image is not a record. It is an intuition. A way for the mind to hold the feeling that beginnings often come after endings, that survival carries memory forward, that every new settlement is a response to a former home that is no longer accessible. From this imagined shore, time flows forward again. Settlements rise. Firelight glows in new dwellings. Children learn words shaped by old tongues. Hands shape clay. Marks are pressed into soft surfaces to hold accounts, prayers, names. Writing is born not as an invention from nothing, but as an answer to the fear of forgetting. And in those first marks, there are already references to earlier times. Lists that begin before they can be verified. Stories that begin before anyone can remember. Names of figures who are more than mortal. Titles that stretch life spans into the impossible. The scribes write them anyway, because truth is not only what can be measured, it is also what is believed, what is felt, what gives structure to the world. The ancient gods settle into these marks like shadows cast by a fire. They are present but not graspable. They are described in gestures and metaphors. They order the world. They establish boundaries. They speak once, then fall silent. They withdraw to places unreachable. This withdrawal leaves space for human kings to rule, space for priests to interpret, space for communities to organize themselves, space for error, for learning, for growth. The gods do not micromanage humanity. They are not conquerors. They are distant reference points, like stars used for navigation, not destinations themselves. Over centuries, the divine stories become part of daily rhythm. People wake, work, love, argue, grow old, die. The gods are invoked at births and funerals, at planting and harvest, at coronations and disasters. Yet in daily life, humans rely on themselves. They repair walls. They store grain. They teach children. They remember. And slowly, almost unnoticed, humanity becomes the custodian of what was once attributed to the gods. Knowledge that was once sacred becomes practical. Skills that were once miraculous become common craft. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The gods fade further into the background, still honored, still remembered, but no longer immediate. Time passes. Conquests come. Cities burn. Libraries crumble. New languages replace old ones. Some stories survive in translation. Others survive only as fragments quoted by later hands. Many vanish entirely. Yet the feeling remains. The feeling that something important lies behind the veil of recorded history. The feeling that what we see in ruins and tablets is not the beginning, but the visible surface of something deeper. The feeling that humanity's story is not a clean arc, but a layered sediment of attempts, collapses, rebuildings, borrowings, adaptations. In the modern age, we look back at these earliest records and feel awe. We see complexity where we expected simplicity. We see sophistication where we expected primitiveness. We wonder how such systems appeared so fully formed. We ask what came before, and in asking, we revive the ancient instinct once more. The search for origins is not new. It is ancient. It is part of being human. Every generation stands on the shoulders of the last and wonders who built the shoulders. Some imagine a single lost civilization. Others imagine many small forgotten ones. Some imagine visitors from afar. Others imagine slow natural development. All are attempts to make sense of the same perception, that time is vast, and evidence is thin, and memory is fragile. But in this story, we do not chase certainty. We simply observe the shape of the longing itself. We notice how often ancient tales speak of teachers who came and left. We notice how often myths speak of ages before the current one. We notice how often cultures describe themselves as inheritors of earlier wisdom. This pattern suggests that civilization has always viewed itself as continuation, not creation, as student, not master, as heir, not originator. Perhaps this is the quiet truth beneath the legends, that humanity has always sensed it is part of a lineage, that knowledge is passed, not spontaneously generated, that life is relay, not solitary sprint. And if there were ages before recorded history, whether simple or complex, whether small or widespread, their influence would likely survive exactly as it does now, in myth, in intuition, in the persistent sense of something older just out of reach. As the night grows deeper, the images soften further. Cities dissolve into dust, names blur. Even the gods fade into gentle silhouettes, barely distinguishable from the dark horizon. What remains is only the rhythm. Arrival, teaching, withdrawal, ending, rebuilding, remembering. This rhythm repeats in families, in cultures, in species. It is the rhythm of continuity. And so the title returns quietly to the mind, not as a statement, but as a mood. Human civilization may be the aftermath of something older, not an assertion to defend, a thought to rest inside. An aftermath is not ruin alone. It is what follows. It is the field after harvest, the calm after storm, the silence after a voice has finished speaking. It is not empty. It is full of potential, shaped by what came before. If we are an aftermath, then we are also a beginning for something yet to come. The chain continues forward. Future generations will look back at us and wonder what came before them. They will tell stories of our time. They will misunderstand some things. They will mythologize others. They will feel the same mixture of awe and uncertainty. And perhaps they too will sense that behind their world lies another, older one, half remembered, half imagined. They will ask the same questions in new forms. They will sit in their own quiet nights and wonder where they came from. For now, the mind rests. The story breathes. The ancient gods have long withdrawn. The ancient worlds have long dissolved, yet their echo remains in the very act of wondering, a whisper through time, a quiet inheritance, a gentle sense that we are never truly at the beginning, only at another turn in an endless unfolding. And in that sense, the story continues without need for conclusion, like a river moving through darkness, soft, unhurried, always flowing beyond what we can see. The river moves without hurry. It does not care whether anyone watches. It does not announce where it began, nor where it will end. It simply flows, carrying within it the memory of every drop that ever joined its course. In the same way, time carries us forward, while holding within itself all the forgotten moments that shaped what we now call the present. Some nights, when the world is quiet enough, it feels as if one could almost step backward into those earlier moments, not physically, but inwardly, a soft reversal of attention, a drifting toward origins that are not clearly defined, toward impressions that are not personal memories, yet feel strangely intimate. A hand shaping clay, a voice calling across water, a child listening to a story whose beginning is already lost. These are not scenes from any single place or era. They are fragments of a shared human inheritance, woven so deeply into us that they feel like echoes of our own experiences, even when they belong to ancestors whose names are gone. Perhaps this is why the idea of an older world never disappears, because each generation senses in its bones that it has received life from elsewhere, that nothing begins from nothing, that there is always a before, even when the record is silent. In the earliest cities, people raised walls, not only to protect themselves, but to define space. Inside the walls, order. Outside, uncertainty. This separation between order and chaos appears again and again in ancient stories. The gods establish the boundary. They set the measure. They bring structure to the formless. Then they step away, leaving humans to maintain what has been given. In this pattern, the gods are not tyrants. They are initiators. They mark the moment when potential becomes form. Once form is established, their role is complete. They withdraw. They do not linger. They are remembered, honored, invoked in ritual, but no longer physically present in the narrative of daily life. This withdrawal leaves behind a subtle melancholy, a sense that something precious has receded, yet also a sense of empowerment. Humans now carry the task. They must keep the fire burning. They must keep the stories alive. They must pass knowledge to the next generation. If there was an older age before recorded civilization, perhaps it followed the same rhythm, an earlier ordering, an earlier guidance, an earlier withdrawal. The details are lost, but the emotional structure survives. That is what myths preserve, not events, but meanings. Consider how often ancient stories speak of a first time. The first temple, the first city, the first king, the first law, the first word. These firsts are not always literal. They mark turning points in consciousness, moments when humanity became aware of itself in new ways, moments when life changed direction. And if there were multiple turning points before writing began, they would be remembered only through layered stories, each layer interpreting the previous one, each retelling smoothing rough edges, each generation adding its own understanding. In this way, a real transformation in deep time could become a divine act in myth. A shift in social structure could become a council of gods. A technological discovery could become a gift from heaven. A migration could become an exile from paradise. A natural disaster could become a sacred flood. These translations from event to myth are not deceptions. They are the language of memory working with limited tools. Early minds did not separate fact from symbol as we try to do. For them, meaning mattered more than precision. To say, "the gods taught us," may simply have meant we learned something so important that it feels larger than any one person. And once that phrase entered tradition, it would be repeated long after its original context was forgotten. The divine teacher becomes a character. The character becomes part of ritual. The ritual becomes part of identity. The origin dissolves into the structure of culture. Perhaps the sense that civilization is the aftermath of something older is born from this very process. We look at ancient myths and feel that they point backward to realities beyond our sight. And maybe they do, not as literal accounts, but as emotional fossils embedded in story. Like bones in stone, these fossils tell us that something once lived here, not necessarily what shape it had in detail, but that it existed, moved, mattered. Time, however, is a patient eraser. It wears down mountains. It fills valleys. It covers shorelines. It swallows camps, villages, roads, temples. Even stone yields eventually. If there were early settlements made of wood, reed, or mud, they would leave almost nothing after many thousands of years, only a scatter of traces, easily missed or misinterpreted. This is why mystery remains, not because of hidden secrets kept by design, but because time is vast and preservation is fragile. The gaps in the record invite imagination, and imagination, when guided gently, does not need to invent wild certainty. It can simply explore possibility. In the quiet storytelling space, possibility is enough. Perhaps before the earliest known cities, there were others. Perhaps they were small, brief, vulnerable. Perhaps they left behind habits, ideas, seeds of knowledge. Perhaps later peoples inherited these seeds without knowing their source. Perhaps the memory of inheritance became the story of ancient teachers. Or perhaps the entire pattern is symbolic of how each child inherits from parents, each generation from the previous. Either way, the sense of being an aftermath remains meaningful. The ancient gods, in this telling, are not masters of humanity. They are markers of transition. Their arrival signals the birth of order. Their withdrawal signals humanity stepping into its own role. They are like doorways between ages. Once they withdraw, the world becomes fully human. Kings rise, laws change, wars happen, trade expands, writing spreads, empires grow. All of this unfolds without divine intervention in the stories. The gods remain in temples and prayers, but history belongs to humans. This shift mirrors how children grow. At first, parents feel like all-knowing beings. They feed, protect, teach, then gradually, they recede into the background of life. The child becomes adult, the world becomes their responsibility. The parents are still honored, still remembered, but no longer central in every moment. Myths of divine withdrawal may be humanity's way of expressing its coming of age. If so, then what came before civilization was not merely a physical condition, it was a psychological one. A time when humans experienced knowledge as external and mysterious. A time when understanding arrived as revelation rather than accumulation. A time when the world felt enchanted and alive with intention. The movement into civilization was the movement into self-authorship. The slow realization that humans could shape their own fate, that laws could be written by human hands, that cities could be planned by human minds, that stories could be composed, not only received. The gods withdrawing is the moment when humanity realizes it is no longer merely a listener to cosmic instruction, but a speaker in its own right. Yet, even as humans take up this role, they continue to remember the earlier feeling. They continue to tell stories of teachers who once guided them. Because deep down, the sense of being taught, of being guided, never entirely disappears. Every new discovery still feels like a revelation. Every new insight feels like a gift. We continue to say, "It came to me," as if from elsewhere. Thus the divine never fully leaves. It changes form. It becomes inspiration, intuition, sudden understanding, the inner voice. The outer gods fade. The inner spark remains. In this long view, civilization is indeed an aftermath, not of a single lost empire, but of successive transformations in how humans relate to knowledge, authority, and meaning. Each transformation leaves behind stories. Each story becomes part of the next layer. And so we sit here, in the present, telling a new version of the old pattern. We speak of ancient gods, not as rulers, but as distant teachers. We speak of forgotten ages, not as proven fact, but as possibilities. We speak of inheritance, not as a fixed chain, but as a living current. The listener drifts deeper into stillness. Words become gentle waves. The mind floats. There is no need to hold any idea tightly. They pass through like clouds across a night sky. Civilization may be the aftermath of something older. The sentence no longer demands proof. It becomes a lullaby of thought, a reminder that behind us lies a vast, dim ocean of time, that within that ocean, many worlds may have risen and fallen, that we are a crest on one wave, not the ocean itself, and when this wave subsides, others will rise. They too will look back. They too will wonder. They too will imagine ancient teachers in forgotten ages. The cycle continues. The whisper never fully stops. The whisper never fully stops. It only changes volume, sometimes loud enough to be noticed, sometimes so faint it blends into the background of thought. Even in the brightest age of reason, even in the loudest cities, there are moments when a person pauses and feels that they are standing on ancient ground. supported by foundations they did not build, formed by influences they cannot fully name. This feeling does not belong only to scholars or dreamers. It belongs to anyone who has looked at a star-filled sky and sensed both awe and familiarity. Anyone who has held a worn object and wondered about the hands that shaped it. Anyone who has heard an old story and felt a strange stirring, as if something inside recognizes it, even without understanding why. Perhaps this recognition is the true inheritance. Not a memory of specific events, but a memory of continuity itself. A deep-rooted sense that life did not begin with us. That before our moment, there were other moments. Before our structures, other structures. Before our understanding, other attempts at understanding. When ancient storytellers spoke of gods who came from the heavens or rose from the sea, they may have been giving form to this recognition. They may have been expressing the arrival of knowledge, the spark of insight, the sudden awareness that life could be shaped intentionally. And when they spoke of gods withdrawing, they may have been expressing the quiet realization that the responsibility had passed to human hands. The imagery is powerful because it mirrors our inner life. When we learn something deeply, it feels as if wisdom visits us from outside. When we master it, it feels as if it has always been ours. The teacher withdraws. The student becomes the bearer of the teaching. Civilization itself can be seen in this way, a long apprenticeship of humanity. At first, knowledge arrives in sudden leaps, shrouded in mystery, remembered as divine gifts. Later, knowledge becomes systematic, methodical, shared. The mystery recedes. The human role expands. Yet the early leaps are never fully explained. They become sacred stories, myths of origin, tales of gods and heroes. They preserve the emotional memory of discovery, even when the practical details are forgotten. Over time, people begin to distinguish myth from record, symbol from fact. But the mythic layer does not disappear. It remains under the surface, like bedrock beneath soil. Even when ignored, it shapes the landscape above. Modern minds sometimes feel embarrassed by myth. They want clean timelines, clear evidence, precise cause and effect, but in doing so, they risk losing something subtle. Myth is not only falsehood. It is the language of experiences too large for simple explanation. It holds the shape of transitions that cannot be photographed or measured. If there truly were earlier ages of civilization, now lost to sea or sand, they would survive in mythic language, not in technical manuals. They would survive as stories of first teachers, first cities, first disasters, first renewals. And even if those ages were small and scattered, their memory could grow in telling, expanding into grand epics. Thus, the notion of an older world need not be taken as a literal empire hidden in the mist. It can be understood as the deep intuition that humanity has passed through many thresholds, each one reshaping life so thoroughly that the previous way of being feels like another world entirely. The shift from wandering to settlement, the shift from oral memory to writing, the shift from small kin groups to vast states, the shift from sacred kingship to law. Each of these is an ending and a beginning. Each creates an aftermath. Each leaves survivors adapting to a transformed reality. Those who first settled might have felt exiled from a freer life of movement. Those who first wrote might have felt that memory was leaving the body and entering clay. Those who first obeyed written law might have felt the withdrawal of older, personal authority. Each shift creates stories of what was lost and what was gained. When we speak of forgotten epochs, we may be sensing not only physical changes, but inner ones, changes in how humans understand themselves, changes in consciousness, changes in what it means to belong, to know, to trust, to remember. Ancient gods, in this light, are not beings who walked the earth in towering forms. They are names given to forces of transformation. When a new way of life arrives, it feels external, powerful, overwhelming. It feels like something descending upon humanity. When that way of life becomes normal, the god has withdrawn. This pattern is timeless. Even now, technology arrives like a gift from an invisible realm. Knowledge appears on glowing screens. Invisible networks connect distant minds. To a person from a few centuries ago, this would appear miraculous, divine, incomprehensible. In time, it will become ordinary, and the sense of miracle will fade. Future storytellers may speak of our era as one where invisible forces reshaped the world. They may personify algorithms as deities. They may imagine teachers who came from light and vanished. Myths will form around what we now call progress. Thus, the process continues. Each age mythologizes the origins of what it has inherited. Each generation believes it stands at the cutting edge, yet carries layers of forgotten influence. So when we imagine an older civilization before ours, we are participating in an ancient mental movement. We are projecting backward the same sense of mystery that future generations will project onto us. This realization does not make the mystery less beautiful. It makes it more human. It places our longing for origins inside a larger pattern of longing. It shows that wondering about what came before is itself part of what came before. In this gentle view, there is no need to decide whether ancient gods were literal visitors or poetic figures. They are meaningful either way. They remind us that knowledge feels like a gift, that beginnings feel sacred, that every inheritance feels like a blessing received from unseen hands. As night deepens further, the story grows quieter. Words soften, images blur. Only the feeling remains. That life is a chain of gifts passed forward, many givers forgotten, many receivers unaware of how much they have received. Perhaps this is the most peaceful way to hold the idea of being an aftermath. Not as a loss, not as a tragedy, not as a conspiracy, but as a gentle truth. We stand on shoulders we cannot name. We walk paths we did not clear. We speak words we did not invent. We live in worlds shaped by countless minds before ours. And one day, we too will be part of the invisible past. Our buildings will crumble. Our records will fade. Our myths will change shape. Our names may vanish. But something of us will pass forward, embedded in habits, languages, ideas, intuitions. Someone in a distant future may sit in quiet darkness and wonder what came before them. They may feel the same echo of something older. They may tell stories of forgotten teachers and vanished worlds. They may sense our presence as a whisper behind their thoughts. And in that way, the chain continues. The whisper flows on. The river never ends. The river of thought slows now, becoming almost still. Not stopping, never stopping, only widening into a calm surface where reflections drift without urgency. In this quiet, there is no need to hold any single image too clearly. They have served their purpose. They have guided the mind into a space where time feels deep and gentle, where certainty is no longer required. Somewhere behind us lie the first sparks of fire in human hands. Somewhere behind that lie colder nights without flame. Somewhere behind even that lie, forms of life that knew no story at all. And somewhere ahead lie futures that will forget our names, just as we have forgotten so many before us. Yet through all of this, something continuous moves forward, a passing of awareness, a quiet inheritance. Civilization, whether young or old, whether built once or rebuilt many times, is part of that inheritance. It is a pattern carried across generations, reshaped again and again. Sometimes it breaks. Sometimes it vanishes. Sometimes it returns in new forms. Each time, those who live within it feel that they stand at a beginning, and yet always they carry echoes of something older. Perhaps that is why ancient gods were imagined as teachers who withdrew, because knowledge arrives, changes us, then leaves us to grow on our own. The gods do not need to remain. Their presence is in what they left behind, in skills, in stories, in ways of seeing the world. Their absence is not abandonment, but trust. In this view, there is no lost golden empire hidden under seas, no single forgotten kingdom that explains everything. Instead, there is a long chain of small awakenings, small collapses, small renewals, each one leaving traces, each one giving rise to myths, each one becoming the older world for those who came after. And so the idea that human civilization may be the aftermath of something older becomes less a mystery to solve and more a quiet recognition of how life moves. Everything is aftermath. Every moment follows another. Every structure stands upon previous foundations. Every word is built from earlier sounds. Every thought is shaped by earlier thoughts. Even now, as these words settle into silence, they become part of that chain. They join countless other stories told in the dark, told to ease wonder, told to honor the unknown, told to remind listeners that they are not alone in time. The listener breathes slowly. The mind loosens its grip. There's nothing left to analyze, nothing to prove. Only the soft impression of being carried forward by something vast and ancient. Somewhere, in ages long past, someone else may have felt the same quiet awe. Somewhere, in ages yet to come, someone will feel it again. The form of the story will change. The names will change. The images will change. But the whisper will remain. Human civilization may be the aftermath of something older, not a statement, not a conclusion, only a gentle thought, floating like a lantern on still water, drifting into darkness, leaving behind a faint glow that slowly fades, but never entirely disappears. And in that fading light, the mind rests. The story breathes on. Silence remains,